Hey guys, Youngblood with you for your Should You Buy video on the newly released concept ship, the RSI Zeus Mark II. This is the Mark II because the ship is designed after and inspired by the legendary Zeus, which in lore was a space shuttle-esque design that was created and sold as the Any-Man spaceship. Now, in lore, the ship required a quantum drive that RSI also provided, but the drive was so expensive that basically only billionaires could sponsor spaceflight, and it wasn't really until Tarsus created a much cheaper alternative that really opened the doors for long-range flight that kind of forced RSI's hand into lowering the pricing of their drives. So when you see the sales page praising RSI for this new Mark II following the tradition of accessibility, just remember that Tarsus should really be included in that story. But none of that really matters. That's lore and sales tactics in a brochure or an ad. What really matters is what the hell is the Zeus and is it worth your money? Well, the Mark II is actually 3 different variants of the same ship, with the ES, or the Essential version, claiming a robust radar package and enhanced weaponry and shielding, which is for sale at $150 normal price or war bond at $135, which means all new money being spent. The MR, or the Marquee, or the Mark, depending on how you would like to say it, is also what I like to call the Zeus Mark II Mark, which I now have to feel like I have to call it the Mark, being more of a bounty hunting or a security version of the ship, coming with an EMP and quantum dampener priced at $190 credits or $170 war bond, with the final version being the CL or the Clipper, which is the commerce or cargo focused hauler, priced at the same point as the ES. Now, while the versions are all different in their purpose and their intended role, there's a lot of similarities in the ships. The size of the ships is 45 meters long, 34 meters wide, and 8 meters tall, which makes it long, narrow, kind of delta-shaped, really more reminiscent of the RSI Polaris than the original Zeus to my eye, but it does share the same sweeping upward wings of the original Zeus. All 3 variants have a crew size of 3 with a pilot seat and 2 support seats on the bridge that is almost a combination of the Polaris and the Andromeda. Immediately behind the cockpit area, you have an airlock on the port side of the ship, and in that area you have a storage chute for lockers if you need to go EVA. Now, it isn't clear at this point if there's a weapons rack in this area or not, but regardless, just after that area, there appears to be a ladder or a lift to be able to get yourself on and off this ship, and what looks to maybe be an engineering station. A little bit further back is where we start running into our first difference in the interior layout of the ships, where you end up having, more of that habitation area for your crew. The ES, being Essential, has the most quote-unquote wasted space on board if you consider living areas with extra space to be unnecessary. The ES has the largest space dedicated to the crew habitation area. This space seems to include bunks, bathroom, and kitchen area if I can make sense of the diagram of the internals of the ship. The CL version has a smaller space dedicated to the crew, as that final wall is kind of pushed further towards the front of the ship to make for a much larger cargo area behind it. While the MR, the combat version, has a hallway behind the crew area with a dedicated armory position behind that space. Along with the little hallway there. So you're not getting as much crew living areas or as much cargo area. The MR's cargo area is smaller overall. And there's a couple different dedicated prisoner transport areas to help support bounty hunting. While the ES has a fairly open space in the cargo area just to, carry, cargo. It's essential. There's not a whole lot going on there. Now, I'm not actually sure what changes between the CL from the ES to allow for about 4 times the cargo carrying ability, since the size of the cargo hold that you gain on the ship doesn't even seem to be twice what the ES starts with. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time with either stats changes or ship design or arbitrary limitations. The last note on the layout and design is that they all have a large ramp that drops from the rear for loading, and it looks like the ship could easily support transporting a ground vehicle, but what size we just don't know yet. If we want to look at all the components, the story is muddy because the stats page is often wrong. Sometimes the brochures that get released are wrong as well, and more normal than I would like. They are conflicting or at odds with each other. We also just have sizes. We don't have any specific components yet. So Where we think we have shared components between all of these ships would be all three having 2 size 2 power plants, 2 size 2 coolers, 2 size 2 fuel tanks, and allegedly having single size 2 computers, quantum tanks, and quantum drives. There are a few areas that there are differentiations. The first being with shields, where the ES brings 4 size 2 shields, which is a very robust shield package, especially considering it's not that much larger than a Vanguard, which is a dedicated combat ship, but this has double the shield pool of the Vanguard. So I kind of expect that to get tuned down to some degree, but that's a little bit complicated because the other 2 variants have 3 size 2 shields, which is still a lot. So, do you shift them all down by 1, and then how is that different from some of the other competition that's out there? It's just kind of a sticky spot for the ship. All 3 versions are listed on the stats page as having large radars, but I'm pretty confident based on the brochure that only the ES has the size 3 radar, as it's sold as being enhanced, where the other 2 will likely have a size 2 radar. That size 3 component would be a size above the ship, which would make it noteworthy. This is really more of a size 2 ship with a size 3 component. Additionally, to support the exploration role of the ES, it also comes with a single size 3 hydrogen fuel range as compared to the 2 medium hydrogen fuel tanks that we see on the MR and the CL. And what that means in actuality, it's hard to know, but if we're comparing something like the Caterpillar, which has a single large fuel tank and what seems to be a small ancillary tank as well, but that may be for the breakaway cockpit, overall, its hydrogen capacity is about 2.5 million. If we look at the Aquila, which comes with 2 medium tanks, it's just over 1 million on hydrogen capacity. So the difference is very meaningful by moving to a single large tank for your overall range capabilities on the ES as compared to 2 mediums that the other models offer. The last component difference I want to call out would be in the world of jump modules, which doesn't really matter yet, but as we have other systems coming in, it will be important at some point, and Pyro is coming soon. But the MR is shown in the stats page as having a medium module as compared to a small one on the ES and the CL. What that means and if it's accurate or not, I have no idea. But I did want to point it out because that may be something in the future. From a weapons perspective, the pilot-controlled weaponry on all of them is the same, placing it all at 2 size 4 fixed hardpoints. The turret, which is remote controlled from the cockpit seat, not pilot controlled, either has 2 size 3 weapons or 2 size 2 hardpoints. I don't think that I've seen it clarified, but the information is a little bit muddy at best. What we do know, though, is that the MR variant has an additional remote turret added in, giving you better coverage and doubling the either size 2 or size 3 weapons that you have on the turrets. Now, can both turrets be used at the same time? I think that's an easy assumption, assuming you have your cockpit filled with 3 people. But without that, I'm guessing you would have to swap between the remote turrets if you only have somebody flying and somebody using the turrets. But you never know. The MR also has an EMP and a quantum dampener to help facilitate capturing bounties, with the sizing, capabilities, and range of these 2 devices not being known at this point. It is known, though, that this ship does not bring a quantum snare to pull people out of quantum, so you're still relying on something like the Mantis for that. But if you're trying to bounty hunt, and if you can get close, you can prevent them from making the jump away from you. The last piece of special hardware and difference to discuss is that the CL comes with a tractor beam that can help you to increase the speed and efficiency of cargo loading and unloading. So as we start the decisioning process, let's talk a little bit more about each variant and what ships I personally think it might be competing against to try and assess value of the offering. Starting off with the ES version, it has an eye for exploration with a little flair for combat. It has a crew of 3, so you're probably in the Freelancer to Constellation range for comparison, and for that, we should probably look at the Dur and the Aquila. But considering the price of the Aquila, it's a lot more ship. That also comes with a snub, so I think the Dur is really the best comparison point. Both of those ships, being the ES and the Dur, and honestly the Aquila, they all have enhanced radar suites to allow for better exploration abilities. I think the pilot-controlled weaponry is in favor of the Dur for better damage output, while the shields on the ES are double that of the Dur, which is a tremendous asset. Cargo ability for the ES is 32, which turns out to be about 4 more than the Dur. I also think that the ramp on the back of the ES will probably be an improvement over the non-max Freelancer variant ramps. And I also think that the prices are close enough that if I'm picking, the ES should have more range, more shields, more cargo, larger radar, and a better design, if I'm being frank, to where if you were already sold on the DUR for your ship, then I think the ES is definitely worth considering an upgrade to. Now, if we look at the MR variant, we're now talking about an almost $200 combat ship that leans more towards bounty hunting, which is good because it doesn't really sell me tremendously well on being equipped for just fighting. The real specialty that it brings is that combination of the EMP and the dampener, and to really compare to that combo, you're primarily bumping up against the $210 Scorpius Antares. Now, if you look at just combat ability, in more of a dogfighting perspective, the Antares is going to far surpass this ship in being more agile and having better pilot-controlled weapons. But with those capacitor changes, the turret gunners that you bring along make a significant difference, and if you can manage to equip both of them, it will make things interesting from a damage output model. Now, I have to assume that the speed of the MR will be less than that of the Antares. The Antares is pretty quick, and will mean that it's going to have a harder time keeping targets dampened to prevent them from getting out of range and jumping. I think the primary reason that you would need to consider the MR, though, is that it's more of a do-it-all-itself type of ship. The Antares has those two devices, but the MR has storage, which supports the spoils of war, as well as just outright piracy. The MR has holding cells for prisoners, which both of those tend to indicate that the Antares is more of a support ship or more of a fighter than an actual bounty hunter. Other ships that are worth considering here would be like the Cutlass Blue, which has better firepower than the MR, at least for the pilot, but no EMP. But it does bring the holding cells, as well as another ship like the Hawk, which has a single holding cell and an EMP, but it lacks size, cargo, and the dampener. Overall, in this role, the MR is probably the most well-rounded of the bounty hunting group, right? Even if it's not the most effective at any of those particular aspects. If I'm personally picking a bounty hunting ship, my favorite is still going to be the Cutlass Blue, as I see the EMP being probably the most disposable item on this list, especially knowing that you can reach a lot of the same results by opting for distortion weapons, and it is very effectively used as a solo ship. But the MR is absolutely worth some consideration. The last one to talk through is the CL, which might be the one that's making me think about the hardest. Because I currently have a Freelancer Max, and the Max is easily one of my favorite mid-sized haulers in the game. The Max at some point was hinted at being the largest ship that can utilize the smallest jump points, and at 38 meters long, 34 wide, and 9.5 tall, the Max and the CL are kind of within the margin of error, to where the CL may be able to fit into the same category as the Max. The Max carries 122 SU of cargo compared to 128 on the CL, so there's a slight advantage to the new ship. I prefer the weaponry on the Max, but again, the CL gets the advantage in durability with the extra shield. I also think that based on two size 2 fuel tanks, that the CL probably almost doubles the hydrogen range of the Max, while it does share the same size quantum tanks, so that range probably doesn't change much. The CL gets the tractor beam that the Max doesn't have by default, and overall just appearance and design, I personally think the Zeus is a lot more appealing to look at, and maybe more agile and controllable in an atmospheric environment. I think the big wild card when I look at these is going to be the vehicle carrying ability on the CL. We know the Max is one of the better vehicle haulers in the game and can bring everything from Ursas and below and multiple of them. And depending on the ceiling height, which the Max is a taller ship than the Zeus, you may have less flexibility in hauling vehicles around. We won't know that for a while, but depending on what vehicles you bring along usually, the Max may end up being a better bet for you. So with all of that information out of the way and some early comparisons of what I think are likely challengers, should you buy a Zeus Mark II? I actually like the pricing on these ships for the most part, and I think they offer good capabilities in return, so that return on your investment is pretty strong. I would say if the cargo is your game and you prefer running over fighting, then I think the CL is a really easy yes and offers a lot of ship for the money, especially if you're less concerned about fitting vehicles on board. From a combat perspective, if bounty hunting is the focus, I still prefer the Blue, but the MR is a solid performer that offers the ability to do a lot of aspects. If you just want to use it for fighting and not capturing, I think there's far better options than the MR. Finally, the ES with the fourth shield, which if it stays is a tremendous benefit from a smaller Explorer category. Honestly, I think the ES offers a lot of function at a competitive price and probably outperforms the DUR, which I would have previously considered to be best in class. So yeah, I do. I think there's a place for each variant as long as you know what you're looking for and how you want to do it and what these ships do well, and the pricing is, competitive enough. So another final note before we wrap this up was that we've been talking about three variants being the ES, MR, and CL. There is a possibility of a fourth variant coming out. That's not just speculation, but some of the examples shown during CitizenCon had a branded ST Zeus that could have been art, that could be a hint. It could just be a name that one of these other versions started out as having. But long story short, it doesn't really mean anything for sure, and it's not available now. So it doesn't really matter at this point. It's just worth calling out. So with that out of the way, that's it for now. If you have questions, please get them into the comments. Share impressions of your own. Otherwise, have yourselves a wonderful day. Take care.